The moment I saw my brother standing in the doorway of my mother's hospital room, whispering into his phone and glancing at me like I was the problem, I knew exactly what kind of week this was going to be. My mother had just been moved out of the ICU. She'd had a stroke, mild, the doctors kept saying, as if mild strokes were something you just shook off. And she was alert enough to recognize faces, squeeze hands, and ask for her reading glasses, even though there was nothing to read. That was my mother, always reaching for something. I'm the younger daughter. My brother, 4 years older, had flown in from Phoenix the night before. I'd been at that hospital every single day since she was admitted. I'd spoken to every doctor, filed her insurance paperwork, coordinated with the social worker about a discharge plan. I'd slept in that plastic chair by her bed twice when the nurses were short-staffed, and I didn't want her to wake up alone. He'd been in Phoenix. Now he was here, and he was already on the phone, and the way he angled his body away from me when I walked in told me everything. My mother had, 6 months before the stroke, quietly updated her estate plan. I didn't know about it until her attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Okafor, called me 2 days after my mother was admitted to tell me there were some time-sensitive documents I should be aware of. She wanted to meet with both of us. We met at her office the following Tuesday. My brother sat across from me in a burgundy chair, legs crossed, already looking impatient. My mother, it turned out, had placed her house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, that had been paid off for 12 years, into a living trust. The trust named me as successor trustee. There was also a brokerage account, modest but not nothing, around $180,000, which was to be split evenly between us. And there was a separate personal property memorandum, handwritten and notarized, that itemized her jewelry, her grandmother's china, her coin collection, and various sentimental pieces, all of which she had left specifically to me. My brother sat very still while Ms. Okafor read through the summary. Then he said she wasn't in a position to make those decisions. Ms. Okafor looked at him calmly. The trust was executed 6 months ago when your mother was in excellent health. I'd like a copy of everything, he said. He barely spoke to me in the parking lot. He just said, "I'll be in touch," and got in his rental car. He was in touch within 48 hours. The first call came from a number I didn't recognize. A man who introduced himself as a private investigator. He said he worked for a firm out of Chicago, gave me a name that meant nothing to me, told me he'd been retained by my brother to conduct a review of my mother's financial accounts and her recent decision-making capacity. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to answer some questions. I said no and called Ms. Okafor immediately. She told me not to panic. She told me that without a court order, no PI had any authority over my mother's estate, and that my brother would have to file a formal challenge if he wanted to contest the trust. She said this happened sometimes. She said it almost always went nowhere. But I knew my brother. He was a forensic accountant. He'd spent 20 years finding other people's mistakes for a living. He was meticulous, patient, and he had never once in his life accepted a loss gracefully. When we were kids and he lost at board games, he would spend the rest of the evening explaining why the rules were unfair. I also knew something else. Something I hadn't told anyone. 2 years earlier, when our mother started having trouble keeping track of her bills, before anyone was using the word stroke, before anyone was using any medical words at all, I had stepped in to help her. I had her financial mail forwarded to my address. I had helped her set up automatic payments for her utilities and insurance. I had, with her full knowledge and at her request, been added as a joint account holder on her primary checking account so I could transfer funds when she needed them. It was all completely above board. My mother had asked me to do it. We'd sat at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in February, and she'd handed me a folder of statements and said, "I trust you with this. I don't trust myself right now." But I knew how it would look to someone who wanted it to look bad. It would look like I had positioned myself. It would look like I had inserted myself into her finances right before a major estate update. It would look like exactly the story my brother was already telling people. Because he was already telling people. I found out from our aunt. My mother's sister, who lived in Evanston and called me every Sunday, that my brother had been making calls. He'd spoken to 3 of our cousins. He'd spoken to my mother's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher who'd known our family for 30 years. He'd told all of them some version of the same thing, that he was concerned our mother had been manipulated, that she hadn't been thinking clearly for a long time, that the changes to her estate reflected undue influence, not her actual wishes. He used that phrase specifically. Undue influence. A legal term. He'd done his homework. My aunt called me and said very gently, "Honey, I want you to know I don't believe any of it. But I think you should know what he's saying." I thanked her, and I hung up and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Jewel-Osco for a long time. Then I went home and I started going through every document I had, every text message from my mother asking me to handle something, every email confirmation from her bank when I made a transfer, every receipt from the grocery runs I'd done for her, every photo of the to-do lists she'd written me, every voicemail she'd left me saying thank you. I had more than I realized. I had 2 years of it. I also pulled her medical records from her primary care physician, with her permission obtained via a phone call from her hospital bed, witnessed by a nurse, that showed she had been consistently assessed as cognitively intact at every appointment during the period in question. Her doctor had administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment at her annual visit 9 months ago. She had scored 28 out of 30. The doctor had noted in the chart, in his own words, "Patient demonstrates excellent recall, appropriate judgment, and clear long-term planning capacity." I sent all of this to Ms. Okafor. Then I waited. My brother filed the formal challenge 5 weeks after our mother was discharged from the hospital and settled into a rehabilitation facility in Downers Grove. The filing alleged that the trust had been executed under circumstances suggesting undue influence, and requested that the court appoint an independent guardian ad litem to review my mother's decision-making capacity at the time of signing. My mother, when her physical therapist read her the filing summary, because she insisted on knowing, because she has always insisted on knowing, said, "He's wasting everyone's time." She said it pleasantly, the way she says most things, but she also called Ms. Okafor herself from her room at the rehab facility and asked to make a recorded statement. She spoke for 22 minutes. She described, in precise and organized detail, her reasons for the estate decisions she had made. She talked about my caregiving. She talked about my brother's absence. She talked about a conversation she and he had had at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when he had suggested she consider selling the house and splitting the proceeds while she was still alive because, and she quoted him from memory, "It would be cleaner." She had not forgotten that conversation. She had not forgotten anything. Ms. Okafor told me the recording was, in her words, but while the legal process moved forward, my brother's PI was still working. And that's where things got interesting. I learned, through a mutual family friend who had been approached for an interview, that the investigator had been specifically tasked with examining my mother's financial accounts for any irregularities. My brother had apparently told the PI that he suspected I had been quietly transferring money out of my mother's accounts for personal use. This was not true, not even slightly. I had records of every single transaction I had ever made on her behalf. Every grocery run, every utility payment, every transfer to cover her property tax installment. Everything matched, everything was receipted, and the net flow over 2 years was me putting money in. I had covered shortfalls 6 times out of my own pocket when her fixed income didn't stretch far enough, not taking it out. But the PI didn't know that yet. He was still looking, and while he was looking I found something. I wasn't looking for it. I want to be clear about that. I was going through my mother's old email. She'd given me access to help manage her subscriptions and cancel the ones she didn't use. When I found a thread buried in a subfolder she'd labeled house stuff. It was an email chain between my brother and a real estate attorney in Phoenix. The chain was 8 months old. In it, my brother had inquired about the process for selling inherited real estate in Illinois and how to structure the sale to minimize estate taxes if the property transferred to a single heir. He had written these emails before our mother had her stroke, before the challenge, before any of this. He had also, in one email, described our mother as not fully capable of managing a significant asset, a characterization that was not only untrue but directly contradicted by the medical records I already had. I forwarded the chain to Ms. Okafor without any commentary. She called me within an hour. "Where did you find this?" she asked. I told her. There was a pause. "Okay," she said. "I need to make some calls." The guardian ad litem, a family law attorney named Mr. Fairweather, completed his review 6 weeks later. He interviewed my mother twice, reviewed her medical history, and examined the financial records that both the PI and I had submitted to the court. His report concluded that my mother had been fully competent at the time of the trust execution, that there was no evidence of undue influence, and that the financial records showed no irregularities attributable to me. It also noted in a footnote that Ms. Okafor read to me over the phone in a voice so calm. It took me a moment to understand what she was saying, that the investigation had surfaced correspondence, suggesting the challenging party had misrepresented the beneficiary's decision-making capacity in prior communications, potentially to support a legal claim he had reason to believe was unfounded. The court dismissed my brother's challenge. He did not call me. He did not call our mother. He sent an email to Ms. Okafor's office, 4 sentences long, stating that he accepted the court's decision and would not be pursuing further action. My mother's physical therapist told me later that when she heard the outcome, she nodded and said, "Good," and then asked if it was time for her balance exercises. That was 2 months ago. She is home now. She's back in the Colonial in Naperville, with a grab bar in the shower, and a medical alert bracelet she wears without complaint, and a schedule that I help her maintain, but that she runs. She made pot roast last Sunday. She called me afterward to tell me she'd used a little more time than the recipe called for, and it had been the right call. I am still the trustee of her estate. I am still the person she calls when something needs to be handled, and I do handle it, because that's what I've always done, and because she asked me to, and because there is no version of this where I stop showing up for the person who showed up for me my entire life. My brother has not reached out to my mother since the dismissal. She hasn't brought him up, and I haven't either. That's her relationship to navigate, not mine. But here's what I think about sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet. He hired someone to go through our mother's finances, to prove that I had been stealing from her. He spent money, significant money, on a private investigator and a filing fee and an attorney's retainer. He made calls to our family. He planted a story, and the person he hired to find evidence of my wrongdoing found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But in the process of looking, they surfaced documents I might never have found on my own. Documents that showed exactly what my brother had been thinking, and planning and saying about our mother long before any of this began. He built the case against himself. He handed me the tools. I don't feel triumphant about it. I feel tired, mostly. I feel grateful that my mother is well, and that the law worked the way it was supposed to, and that Mr. Fairweather was a thorough man who read every page of every document he was given. But I also feel something I don't have a clean word for, something that sits between relief and grief. Because he is still my brother. He was at my 6th birthday party, and my high school graduation, and my mother's 60th birthday dinner, where we all laughed until we cried at a story she told about a camping trip that went wrong. That person exists somewhere. I don't know where he went. What I know is this: I showed up. I kept records. I told the truth. And when someone tried to rewrite the story of who I was and what I had done, the records were still there, unchangeable, waiting to be read by anyone who looked carefully enough. My mother always said the truth doesn't need to be defended. It just needs witnesses. She was right. She usually is.